ado, I'll pass this session over to Jim.
Afida, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. It's an honor to be here. I just want to, I'm so thankful for the opportunity to speak to so many of you and that there's such interest in this topic. We're hopefully going to have a very lively conversation today about something that is in all of the headlines. If your inbox is like mine, I'm getting a lot of emails every single day with headlines that sound like this is either the best thing that's ever happened, conversational generative AI, or it's the worst thing that's ever happened. And as we know, usually the truth is somewhere in the middle. So we'll try to parse this out today. And from an education perspective, and particularly from an adult education perspective, give you some things to think about. And as Afida said, I'm coming to this topic in maybe a little bit of a different way, and I'll explain what my orientation is with this topic very briefly. Not to redo my bio, but leading up to where we are right now, I have been doing corporate education for about 13 years. Before that, I was in big corporate environments. And one thing always frustrated me, wherever I worked, especially in big corporates, it was the ability to really scale learning, to scale the knowledge of the trainer or the facilitator, and to make learning sticky. So in about 2017, when AI was really starting to take a turn, and if you remember those days, these were the days of AlphaGo, and a lot of really interesting things were starting to happen in the world of AI. We thought, what if we could harness the power of AI in education? And so that started a journey of really trying to unpack what was possible and discovering what was not possible, and leads us to today. So I'm approaching this both as a researcher, but also as a practitioner. So for many of you, you're doing training, you're working with adults in education. I do the same thing. And I'm trying to use AI in my own practice. So today, as we talk about these things, I'll make sure to give you a sense of what's working for me and what's not, but then more broadly, the definitions of what's going on, so that as you're talking to your clients, your learners, your institutions, you are much more comfortable and confident in these topics. So let me just move forward, and I'll very quickly just tell you what we do at Noodle Factory, so you can kind of see where I'm coming from on this topic. What we have is a conversational AI platform. We call that platform Walter. Walter also has a sister named Winnie. Winnie does different things, but what we do is we allow organizations to take existing content and to use that through conversational AI to engage their learners. Doesn't replace training, doesn't replace facilitators, but it's a way to allow learners to engage with the content in a more human-like and conversational way. So I'll share more about that with you later on in our discussion today. But for today, and this is designed to be an open discussion, but I've got a few key questions that I'm going to pursue and that hopefully we'll come up with some answers to today, if not more questions. First of all, I want to give you a sense of what is the state of AI today, particularly in adult education. Many of you, when you registered for this session, you asked the question, what is a GPT? Why should I care about that? What is it? So in a non-technical way, we'll unpack that and give you a sense of what is a GPT and why are things like GPT-3, now GPT-4, and these large language models getting so much attention. And then very importantly, we'll look specifically at the impact on training and learning. So no matter where you're coming to this topic from, my hope for you is that you walk away with some ideas, probably more questions related to your own practice, but definitely ideas on how you can begin to use AI or not. Maybe you would choose not to, depending on your practice. And one of the reasons you might not is because there are certain risks, ethical concerns, privacy concerns, and we'll touch on that very briefly today and have some conversation around that. And finally, we'll end up looking at opportunities, because there are many opportunities that are low risk, highly ethical, things that we can do today to make ourselves more efficient and get better learning outcomes with our students or our learners. So that's our roadmap for today, those questions. So let's jump right in. And the first thing that I'd like to remind you of is that as a human society, we are seeing, and we have seen over millions of years, accelerating waves of innovation. And it's really been only the last, call it the last couple of 100 years, that things have really started to accelerate. And if you isolate down to just the last, say, 100 years, the amount of innovation that we've seen, these waves of innovation keep getting closer and closer together. And that's no accident, because each of these waves of innovation build on top of one another. And that brings us to today. We can't ignore the elephant in the room, the hype around conversational AI. And these are just, I mean, I could have picked from thousands of headlines. You could probably do the same, but think about the sort of fervor that's taking place in the media, this hype in the media. Some of that is well placed, but some of it is purely hype. And so part of what we need to be able to do is to separate the hype from the reality. So hopefully today is a first step in that journey for you. We also can't ignore ChatGPT. ChatGPT, just to give you a sense of how much of an impact it has had over the last, it's only been 4 months since ChatGPT was launched, literally today, 4 months today, kind of an auspicious date for us to get together. But it was one of the quickest applications to get to 1 million users. Now, this is remarkable because it was very viral. There wasn't a whole lot of marketing around it, unlike TikTok, which launched with well more than a million users internationally. Google would probably be the closest comparison back in the late 90s, but there was no social media. So Google was an interesting phenomenon, very viral all on its own. But you can see how quickly ChatGPT has captured the imagination of really the world, and now having hundreds of millions of daily users, to the point where sometimes the system just falls over. So I'd like to launch a poll if we could, Wing. And here's a very simple question, just a yes or no question. Have you personally experienced AI generated content? Maybe something like ChatGPT, maybe you've used ChatGPT, or maybe it's something a little more negative like deepfake videos. So let's just give everybody a chance to respond to that. Go ahead and lock in your vote when you are satisfied with that. So that's good. We got about 80% of people responding. All right, so let's end that poll in 3, 2, and 1. All right, let's see what those results are. So let's share that with you. Now, okay, so that's interesting. So yeah, and that's to be expected. 79% of us have experienced AI-generated content, or we've maybe seen something like deepfake videos. AI-generated content is everywhere. And then 20% of us have not, 21% of us have not. So either way, you're in the right place. So we'll give you a good sense of what's going on either way. So let's jump into this first question. What is the current state of AI? What's actually going on in AI? And I thought I'd start off with an interesting quote that I heard, and I have not been able to figure out who said this first. It was not me. I wish I would have said this, but it's a very interesting quote. AI might not replace humans, but humans who don't know how to use AI might get replaced. Very clever quote, I thought. And that's never been more true, right? So this panic about AI taking jobs and replacing us is probably misplaced at this point. Now, it's hard to predict the future. 5 years from now, I might have a different answer for you. But today, we're not talking about replacing humans. We're really talking about augmenting humans and, in certain ways, giving humans superhuman capabilities, which is exciting, but also can be a bit daunting. So if you think about the current state of AI at work, and here I'm thinking particularly in learning and development and training, think about some of the roles that we might be able to get AI to help us with. So just run your eye down that list. So whether we're talking about a virtual facilitator like Walter, the AI that we've created, maybe a career coach, certainly from language, a tutoring perspective, research assistant, editor, sales coach. There's so many different ways that you can think of AI as a co-pilot for you. In fact, that term is often used when we talk about coding. So programmers, coders. This has been something that Microsoft, as an example, and other software companies have offered to coders is an AI co-pilot. Well, that's getting better and better because the sorts of tasks that AI can undertake, that list is getting much, much longer. So for those of you who are in adult education, think about the areas that are very time consuming for you that need to be done. They're important, but they don't necessarily need to be done by you. What if you had a co-pilot? What if you had an assistant? So this is where interesting things start to happen. So things like answering questions. So I don't know about you, but I have a lot of questions that come my way, particularly after a class, that maybe an AI could handle that. And not just your typical chatbot, but a conversational AI. Content creation, and even checking accuracy of content. Just think of this list, this small list here, if we could take some of this off of our daily to-dos. Is that something that could make us effectively superhuman? Probably so. And the key here is something called generative AI. So this is where tools like ChatGPT, Bard, the new Bing, DALL-E, Jasper AI, so lots and lots of tools. This is a very interesting universe right now. This is generative AI. And let me just give you a sense of what that is, because this is really the inflection point, the change in AI that everyone is so excited about. This is not new, by the way, but the ability for the average everyday person to harness generative AI is new. So basically, generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that uses networks of algorithms to produce content. That's the key, to produce new content. So that could be audio, video, code, text, simulations, videos. And the unique thing here is that today's generative AI is not creating new content out of whole cloth, so to speak. It's creating content based on what has already been created by humans. So we'll look at the example of GPT-4, GPT-3, the amazing brilliance of those tools, as you see through ChatGPT, is their ability to string together text and to accomplish tasks that seem very human-like. But that's all on the back of things that have already been created. Now, this image that you see here up on the screen, this is an image of obviously Albert Einstein. We would all recognize Albert Einstein. That was created by an AI using simple language instructions. I'll show you another example of this that I did right here. So using the simple instruction, dogs playing chess, using DALL-E, which is a generative AI tool that generates images, this is what DALL-E came up with and gave me. So this image, to my knowledge, has never existed before. It's a mashup of different images based on my very simple, my deceptively simple instruction, dogs playing chess. So that should give you a good sense of what is generative AI. It's the ability to use instructions like this to tell an algorithm or a network of algorithms to do something that for most humans is pretty difficult, but for an AI is very easy. So in this case, an image. And we'll look at many, many other examples that might resonate with you based on the type of training, the type of work that you're doing in your practice. But before we move on, let me just stop right there and see if you have any questions at all. Wing, how are we looking on questions?
There's no questions currently. Yeah.
All right. Well, the chat window is probably a great place to put questions as you have questions. We're going to do Q&A as we go along. So as you do have questions, let us know in the chat window and we can either stop and have a conversation or we can answer the questions out of chat. But certainly at the end, if you want to save up your questions, we will have a few minutes at the end just for Q&A. So there you go, the current, yes.
Sorry, Jim, we do have a question now.
Okay,
after
great.
You have asked for questions. So
Okay.
Pat is asking, if I use DALL-E to create images, who does the copyright belong to?
Now you're getting into a thorny ethical and potentially legal territory. That's an unknown question at this point, because you're right. Think about images, but you can also do the same with music, right? The ability to create music with AI, anything creative, even text. If it's built on the back of someone else's work, where does that copyright protect the creator, or how does it? And the intellectual property, does it at all? So this is a question that the courts really haven't grappled with yet, but watch this space because they definitely will have to grapple with it, especially in things like images, music, audio, anything creative where you've got copyrights that come into play. Great question. Thank you for that thoughtful question. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, let's move into another question. What is a GPT and why should I care? So you've probably all heard of ChatGPT, maybe GPT-3, GPT-4. Let me just parse this out for you a little bit and give you a simple working definition of a GPT. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. I know this is a term only a developer could love, but GPT is actually very descriptive in terms of what are called large language models can do. They generate, that's the generative part of this, new information or new content based on pre-trained data. It could be text or images or anything, and they transform that into something new. So when you think of it that way, it's actually a very descriptive way to call out what these large language models are doing. So ChatGPT, Generative Pre-trained Transformer, that is an application, and it's only an application that's leveraging a large language model. In this case now, GPT-3, which was really the first GPT that started to get everyone's attention, and then GPT-4, which was released just a few weeks ago to the public. But there are many other large language models. These are just the ones right now that are capturing the attention. Google has released their application Bard, which is running on their large language model. And in the case of GPT-3 and GPT-4, both of these were developed by OpenAI. This is an organization that has been funded primarily by Microsoft, but other individuals and groups. Microsoft's the biggest investor to the tune of, last count, I think it's about 13 billion US dollars with a B. And what they're doing is they're going and scraping the internet essentially for things like text and image and video to train these GPTs on whatever it is they're after. So let's take text as an example. GPT-3 was trained on a relatively trusted subset of the internet, things like Wikipedia, classic works of literature, open source journal articles, anything that was open source and relatively trusted that was ingested. And the goal there was to use something called deep learning, which I'll define in a moment, to look for patterns in the way that we use language. Now, this is primarily English that was used to train, but the pattern of written and by extension spoken language in English. What OpenAI came up with was about 175 billion parameters. That is the equivalent of about 300 billion individual words and about 700 gigabytes of data. So lots and lots of data because it's text. And they were able to spot the patterns in language. And this has allowed tools like ChatGPT to perform these amazing language-driven tasks. So that kind of begs the question, well, what is machine learning and what is deep learning? Because these are two things that often get brought up in the conversations around GPTs, ChatGPT specifically. So machine learning, if you ever hear that term, that's essentially an algorithm. So it can be a network of algorithms, but usually it's specific discrete algorithms that can be trained to do things automatically through experience, and that's the key. Specifically through being exposed to lots and lots of data. So in the case of natural language processing, the more language patterns an algorithm is exposed to, the more likely it is to be able to do things on its own and to amaze us with the accuracy of those tasks. But that's not exactly what the GPTs, specifically ChatGPT, are using. The GPTs that we're talking about are using what's called deep learning. Now, the difference between machine learning and deep learning is a little bit academic because deep learning is actually a type of machine learning, but the key here is it's using networks of artificial intelligence or networks of algorithms. And the deep in the deep learning refers to these multiple layers of algorithms that are operating in what's called a neural network. So large language models like GPT-4 and GPT-3 use deep learning as a way to spot patterns. And so what's interesting about GPT-3 in particular is that these deep learning algorithms, they're often called a black box because even the developers may not completely understand how the algorithms are spotting these patterns and how they're manipulating patterns in language. And therein lies some of the safety and ethical concerns that many people have about these tools, but we'll get to that later. So just one more thing on this, and we'll see if you've got any questions. I don't want to go too technical on this, but maybe a visual would help you to kind of think about the difference between machine learning and deep learning and what we're seeing today in conversational AI. Traditionally in AI, and even in conversational AI, if you go all the way back to the 1950s, this is not a new concept, but in the 50s and 60s, there wasn't the computing power or really any of the capabilities technologically to do the things we're seeing today. So researchers at that time relied on trying to, as humans, predict the pathways that conversations would take. And what they were doing is using what's called structured abstractions. Now, this is great because the accuracy levels are very high when you do this, but it's really, really time consuming and difficult to try to set up any sort of conversational AI using traditional structured abstractions. So think about that accuracy, but it takes a long time. So fast forward to about 2015, and large language models meet neural networks. Neural networks turned loose in these large language models can discover patterns in language that we as humans just don't have the time, the lifetime to discover. And they can do it very, very quickly. So this has really been the shift where now researchers and developers are more apt to use neural networks because they can get these amazing results. But here's the trick. Those amazing results may come at a cost. We don't necessarily know. And this isn't so much a problem today, but if we fast forward to the point where we're creating video, we're creating audio, maybe based on actual video and audio that has been recorded in the past, we don't necessarily know how these neural networks are piecing things together. And that can really be a problem. The reason that something like ChatGPT appears to be so brilliant is because what it's doing is taking bits and pieces of text and stringing it together. So I'm oversimplifying, but think of this as a glorified copy paste, right? So you put in a prompt, an instruction, ChatGPT will go off and figure out, based on all of the text that it's ever been exposed to, what's the right string of text or code or anything else it can do that's going to satisfy your requirement. Now, that's a gross oversimplification, but that's kind of what's going on. It's a predictive text model. When it works, and the brilliance of that is it seems to be very human-like, very novel, and often it does satisfy our requirements. The wackiness of that, though, is because, well, AI doesn't really understand the outside world. So if you're trying to get an AI to string together A and B, well, AIs don't understand the connection between A and B, so sometimes you get wacky answers. Now, and I'll say this for myself, I think, and a lot of researchers think that there's more of a hybrid approach that will end up winning out, where you have what I call designed flexibility. So there is a bit of structure, where you're using AI to assist, but in the case of training, you really have a human in the loop, so it's more business curated. It may slow things down a little bit, but I think there's a growing concern amongst researchers and also investors that maybe we're moving a little bit too fast in this area. And if we take social media as the example, not all is going to be rosy in this space. So we need to have a little bit of caution around this and move very carefully, because this type of technology does have the ability to potentially disrupt a lot of areas of work and society. And that might sound hyperbolic right now, but if we fast forward 5, definitely 10 years, we just need to be very careful about what we're doing now, so that we avoid as much as possible unintended consequences. So let me stop right there, because that's a lot to take on board. Take a breath. That's as technical as we're going to get, but I did want to unpack that for you a little bit. Let's see what questions, if any, we have right now.
We don't have questions for now, but I do have one. So
Yes.
when you mentioned unintended consequences, what are some examples of that? Like, how would that influence or affect us?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get into this in a moment, but just to give you a quick answer on that. So the idea of trusted information or truth, if you can say it that way, there's no such thing as truth for an AI or trustworthy information. There's just data. So if a bad actor, let's say, and this will happen. So we've seen it with social media. We'll see it with AI. If a bad actor decides to produce content that's designed to be misleading, that could be spam, that as simple as that, or it could be deepfake videos that have the potential to cause economic calamity or to start wars. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. It's a little bit hyperbolic to say that right now, but these things will only get better. And so that's the sort of thing that we need to watch out for.
I
And then
see.
certainly from a workplace perspective, we do have to be conscious that the incentives right now around AI are a little bit misaligned. They're more aligned toward profit rather than social good. And so this is probably where government will have to step in and have a regulatory framework that says, here's how AI should operate for societal good as opposed to purely for profit.
I see. So we have two questions in the chat. One from Kenneth.
Yes.
He's asking, are you saying ChatGPT is already taking hybrid approach, or it's going to take that approach?
It is not currently, to my knowledge. I'm not in OpenAI, but I'm saying many researchers and developers, and I'll include myself in this camp as a founder of an AI company. This is the approach we're taking to try to make sure that we're doing this carefully. So designed flexibility. So yeah, you need the flexibility. That's the amazing thing about AI, but you also need to design in some safety nets, if you will, or some guardrails.
Okay, so we have the questions coming in now. Another question is, may I know if you have examples of how HR use ChatGPT to improve their quality of work?
Well, I do have some examples, and we can use this as a jumping off point. Actually, we're coming to that next. And then I can share some just simple examples, and I'll encourage you at the end of today. I've got some things that you might want to tap into to try this for yourself. And as a matter of fact, there's some reading around this if you'd like to read or actually get hands-on with it. So I'll give you some examples of that.
Yep. So we have two more questions relating to the
Okay.
risk and ethics aspect. Do you want to take them now or later?
Could we hold on to those, because we're going to have an
Yes.
entire section dedicated to risk and ethics, if that's all right.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So just in the interest of time, let's get to our third question. And this sort of gets to the question about what are some examples? Well, what is the impact on training and learning today specifically? And we could broaden that out to HR and the organization very broadly too. So let's have a quick look at this. And I'll start off by saying that this is a work in progress. If you look at the literally hundreds, if not thousands, of generative AI companies that are out there, there's a real hype cycle that's underway right now. There's a fervor. This is the new shiny thing. And I say that as somebody who's in this space, but I've been doing this for 5 years, so this is not new for me, and I kind of feel like this is now a gold rush that's going on. I happen to be coming to you today. I'm in London today, and I'm here for the BET Education Conference, which is a massive education conference that you're probably aware of. And generative AI is everywhere. There's a bit of AI washing going on. So just take it with a pinch of salt. This is something that is a work in progress. But I will say there's some amazing things that are going on, and I'll use GPT-4 as the example. This is the new large language model that if you use ChatGPT, they're limiting the use of it right now because so many people are interested, but you can go in and try this for yourself. One of the ways that OpenAI has tested the efficacy of GPT-4 is by exposing it to standardized tests. And sorry, the screenshot's just a little bit blurry here. I took this directly from the OpenAI GPT-4 technical report. I just want to highlight a couple of things for you. The difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4, and the difference in terms of availability here, we're only talking about months, okay? So the improvement here happened in months, not years. So GPT-4 was asked to take the uniform bar exam. So this is the bar exam for lawyers who want to practice in the US. So GPT 3.5 came in the bottom 10% of all test takers. So this is human test takers. GPT-4 was an ace, right? Top 10% in the 90th percentile, meaning that of all the lawyers that have taken the bar exam successfully, GPT-4 would have been the smartest, at least on paper, one of the smartest. The LSAT is another example. GPT 3.5 performed in the 40th percentile. GPT-4 performed in the 88th percentile. So what I'm saying is these algorithms are getting really, really good, at least on basic or core tests of knowledge that humans tend to struggle with. Now, if we flip that around and say, well, what are the implications for training? If we go back to the sorts of tasks and things that we might get help with from an algorithm, these are the types of things that are typically very hard for us as humans, or at least they're very time consuming. And if these algorithms, and think about any role, right? So I did this, a session recently, a fireside chat with a group of bankers, and we were specifically focusing on the role of a banker and wealth managers and account managers and the sorts of mundane tasks, which are, by the way, very error prone, that they have to do. And we kind of got into an interesting conversation about, well, there are a lot of things that could just be automated. Doesn't mean that you get rid of bankers, but maybe it means that every banker has a co-pilot. Every banker has an AI assistant. Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here, the level of so-called intelligence that these algorithms now have allow us to turn them loose on a broader variety of tasks in the organization. So let me give you a couple of examples, a couple of real examples. This one is also a GPT-4 example. This is not yet available to the public, but it will be soon. So GPT-4 was given visual input, and the question, here's the prompt. So the user asked, what's funny about this image? So you take a look at that and see how long it takes you to come up with what's funny about this image. Well, if you look at all the panels, you realize, well, that's an iPhone and an old VGA cable is plugging into it. Oh, okay. So here's a VGA cable. So it's meant to be funny. There's a lightning connector that goes into the Apple iPhone product. So what that tells us is the reason that that's funny is all of these particular reasons. Now, GPT-4 came up with that all on its own. It just analyzed that image. What is it that we're seeing? And very importantly, it doesn't have a sense of humor, but it was able to infer what we as humans might think is funny about that image. Pretty amazing when you think about it. That goes way beyond the sorts of things that we might have expected these types of algorithms to do. Here's another example that is a word processing tool that uses GPT-4. And this is me actually writing a video script. This is a real video that I had to do. And I put in some basic information. And I wanted the algorithm to help me complete this. So I had, there was a paper that I had written, and I wanted to create a script from that. And so I was asking the word processing tool called Lex to help me to create that script, to tighten it up, and to make it look better. So that's a really simple example, something that you can do in ChatGPT. Another really interesting example is, let me just jump to this, is a coding example. So if any of you, maybe you're coders yourself, or you have programming training, coding training that's going on in your organization, maybe you conduct this type of training. Here's an example of someone who used GPT-3 to create a program. So I'm going to just let this run, and I'll describe what's going on. So notice that this individual is using real human language. They're describing what they want. So there's no technical jargon here. It's just human-like language. And what they're asking GPT to do for them is to create an algorithm or a program for a guitar pedal, an electric guitar pedal. It's called a tube screamer. So watch this. Now GPT is going to write some code, and it's not perfect, but it's a start. And so this particular programmer said, this probably saved me several hours just giving me this little start. And if you actually watch this video, it's a little bit of a long video, but they go back and forth, and eventually GPT-3 in this case helps the programmer to come up with the actual program that is eventually used in the system. Let me show you one other example. Actually, I'll show you a few other examples. One is email. So this is an example of a product or a capability that Microsoft will be launching soon. They have not launched it yet. It's only available to a limited number of their customers right now. But have a look at this. So this is an AI assistant operating in Outlook that will allow you to do a lot of different things related to creating emails. So that is using GPT-4, put in some basic information, and it allows you to now create an email. We can insert different images, different instructions. And so this happens to be for a graduation ceremony. And this might be a little bit of overkill, but you can think about in a professional setting, what if we had people who maybe were getting coaching, that their emails were a little too harsh. Maybe this could help them to write more collegial emails and not be so harsh on email, or just to help them and coach them around grammar and spelling and clarity of their writing. So that's something that Microsoft calls the Copilot. They're also releasing that for PowerPoint. This is something that I'm particularly interested in because I create a lot of slides. Have a look at this example. And then I'll show you an example that you can try out today for yourself. So here's a description, the type of presentation that this individual wants to create. Now look at this. This is something that I have dreamed of. So the ability to describe what I want and then at least just get a starting point. It's not going to replace me. It's not going to replace you, but it gives me a starting point. And I can use this type of Copilot to help me to speed my work along. Let me show you one more similar example. And this is something that I did, just knowing that we were going to be getting together. So this is a tool called Tome, as you can see up there, TOME.app. Now watch this. This is me doing this. So I went in and I said, okay, well, I want to try to create a presentation. And you can see it's got some different options there, like DALL-E for images, but I just wanted to create a presentation. And I thought, okay, what would be a good title for a presentation? going beyond the hype of generative AI. And I thought, let me be really descriptive about this, because I want to make sure this is not just about generative AI, but also the impact on humans and our day-to-day lives. My typing is a little slow here, so and my spelling's a little bad, but yeah, so hit enter. And now Tome goes off and begins to use GPT, I think it's 4 in this case, to analyze what I've just said and to create some slides for me. So they're a little bit wordy. They're not exactly the style that I would use, but this is a great starting point. And if I were going to use this for a real presentation, maybe similar to the one we're having today, I've got some great ideas now. So it doesn't replace me. It doesn't replace my own experience and my own knowledge, but it's almost like that co-pilot. It's that muse, if you will, to help me get started and help me be a little more creative. And then the last thing, and this is maybe a little bit of shameless self-promotion, so forgive me, but I just wanted to show you what Noodle Factory does. So this is an example of what Noodle Factory does in the training and learning space. So this is, I believe this is an example that we have from a partner of ours, but let me just see. So what we're doing here is we're taking existing information and we're going to drag that information in. One of the things that we do in our platform is take existing class content, whether it could be PowerPoint, PDF, Word, it could be coming from a website, and we can drag that in. And then what'll happen is this is a journal article that I used. So I'm going to drag that in, I can label that. And now what'll happen is that document gets summarized and cleaned up, very importantly. So it's really just the salient points, and what you end up with is an abstract. This is something that ChatGPT can do, a lot of different tools can do, but here what we're trying to do is put it into the context of training and learning in adult education. Generates keywords out of that document, which can be really useful. And then really importantly, I can generate Socratic questions, or I can generate tutoring questions out of that document. And this saves me so much time. And it then allows me, after a workshop, to give learners the ability to explore that content or to test their knowledge on the content and reinforce that knowledge, to attack the bad old forgetting curve, if you will. So let me stop right there, because I know that's a lot to take on board. Let me just see what questions you might have before we start to wrap up and move into risks and ethical concerns. Any questions about that so far?
Yep. So we do have one previously on, is there any use case of using AI in teaching and learning of neurodivergent persons, such as autism, dyslexia, etc.?
Yes, actually, so that's something, and I'll again use a personal example. That's something that we do today. So we work quite closely with ITE, the Institute for Technical Education in Singapore. And we've done some research papers with them. And one of the interesting and happily unexpected findings that we've had is this is a capability that can be used where accessibility and inclusion is important, particularly where you have neurological challenges like autism. It really helps to develop the comfort and confidence level of students. This is direct feedback that we've gotten from students, because they can approach a subject without judgment. They can take formative assessments, practice quizzes, explore the content as many times as they want until they feel fully comfortable and confident. And what that allows them to do is then come back into the classroom environment and really feel like they can participate if they're open to that. So short answer is yes. There are a lot of different facets to that, but yeah, and matter of fact, Wing, I can share through you to the group that research paper that was written by a team at ITE. We did not have direct involvement in that, so that's useful because it's a peer-reviewed document and peer-reviewed data that they've got.
Yeah, that sounds great. We do have one more question, but it's more on, I guess, like plagiarism related. So is using ChatGPT to generate copy or captions for marketing purposes, would that be considered plagiarism?
This is one of those tricky questions because what you're getting as content is novel. Really, it's potentially never been created before. So in that sense, no. But it is using information, data that was created by somebody else. So this is where the tricky situation comes into play. Who actually owns that? That is yet to be decided. There is, I guess you could say, at a very fundamental level, there's probably a moral question. Is it right to do that? And it's hard to say because one of our marketing people uses ChatGPT to create copy and captions and titles, and we think that that's okay because we're not trying to fool anybody, and in fact, in a lot of cases, we're saying this was created by ChatGPT because we want to highlight the capabilities. So I think that's something that really needs to be thought about a lot more closely. And at the extreme, the courts will certainly have to decide what are the copyright implications of something like ChatGPT.
Yep. Thanks, Jim. So that's all for the questions for this part.
Okay. Well, we're kind of getting into the home stretch, and hopefully now, if nothing else, you probably got a lot more questions, which is good. That's one of the objectives that I had, was to certainly give you information, answer some of those fundamental questions, but to get you to think a little bit more about what's going on. And I think this next conversation, which is unfortunately very brief, will also get you to think about the risks and AI safety concerns and ethical concerns that we all need to take seriously. And I'll start this off by a little quote. It's a quote that I love, and I think it applies in this case. The famous statistician and professor George Box years ago said about statistical models, all models are wrong in some way, I'll add that, but some are useful. And I think that's kind of where we are with something like ChatGPT and any of the other large language models. Is they can be wrong. In some cases, they can be harmfully wrong, but there's a usefulness here that we need to be able to tease out and protect ourselves from that potential harm. And so that's kind of what this is all about, this particular part of the conversation. But before we get in, let me just run a quick poll with you and ask this question. Right now, as we sit today, on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel in your ability to differentiate between AI-generated and human-generated content? So Wing, if we could go ahead and start that poll. So no wrong answer here. This is completely anonymous, but just how confident do you feel right now? And this sort of gets to the plagiarism question too, whether we're talking about in school environments or the unethical use of AI to write things and pass them off as your own in a corporate environment. But just generally, if somebody showed you a piece of content, how confident do you feel? Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. And let's share those results with you. So yeah, so interesting distribution there. And I think this is, I've asked this question of many, many groups of people, and you are not unlike other groups. So most of us feel either not confident or somewhat not confident, or neutral. So the vast majority of us are in that camp. And I think that's the right place to be right now. A little bit of skepticism in this case is a good thing. There's a great New York Times article from, I guess it was December, that had AI generated content next to human generated content, and it was a little quiz that you could do to see how well you did. And even seasoned English teachers and literature teachers had difficulty differentiating between what was human written and what was AI written. And I think from memory, I think it was 8th grade level, so it wasn't super sophisticated. But it just goes to show that it's hard now to differentiate, and we need to think about that from an ethical perspective. So there's a few things that I want you to think about. From an ethics perspective, right now, there is a significant misalignment in incentives. What do I mean by that? Right now, the incentives, as I mentioned earlier, are primarily oriented towards growth So there is a battle going on amongst the big technology companies in this space and profit. Now, I happen to subscribe to capitalism, but not capitalism at all costs. And I think that is the balance that we're going to have to find in these misalignment of incentives is how do we find a place to incentivize both companies, certainly, but even down to the individual level, certainly at a governmental level, to incentivize people to do the right thing with AI. That's a very broad statement, but that has to do with truthfulness or trustworthiness of information. It has to do with societal impact. It has to do with impacts of inequality, job loss, job prospects, just all sorts of implications. How do we realign or ensure that there is alignment of incentives towards the good versus towards things that will cause harm to society and to individuals? So that's point number one. Huge misalignment. And I'm going to recommend to you some reading on this if you want to explore more about that. By the way, the world of AI safety, this is a huge body of research that exists, and it's only getting bigger because it's such an important topic. Point number two related to risk and ethics is that AIs, as we know them today, are really uninterested in fact checking or what we might call the truth, in quotes. Because AI, we tend to subscribe to them human-like qualities, but we cannot forget that they're not human. So there's a lack of interest in fact checking and the truth, not because AIs are malicious, it's because that's the way we've programmed them to be. They are programmed to get us our answer or perform our task in the most efficient way possible. That's the way they're programmed. And so we need to recognize that and either change that, change the programming, change the way that those algorithms work, or simply become more literate in the type of responses that the AIs are giving us and be more skeptical about those responses. Point in fact on this. So OpenAI, the company behind GPT 3.5 and 3 and 4, is still consistently, you're able to prompt these algorithms, these large language models, to give you false information. This is despite the admirable guardrails that OpenAI has put up. So bad actors will always find a way to game the system. I think that's the point. And so we need to have tools and further guardrails in place, but we also just need to have a sense of media literacy and general skepticism about what we're seeing that is AI created. And we need to be able to spot that. Point number three is AI doesn't understand the outside world. So here again, if we try to ascribe human attributes to AI, that is a recipe for disaster. Years ago, I say 3 years ago, Google had an algorithm that was asked the question, what do you like to do on the weekends? The algorithm answered, I like to spend time with family and friends. Obviously, that's false because an AI doesn't have family or friends, but that's what the AI thought that human wanted to hear. So anything to do with the outside world, part of the reason that we get into trouble with AI is that we ascribe these human attributes, and that's something that we definitely should not do. That leads us to point number four. It's so important for humans to remain in the loop. It might seem like a small thing today to keep a human in the loop, but certainly where human safety and even just not just physical safety, but psychological safety, where that is at stake, a human needs to be in the loop. So there needs to be a check and a balance at some point to make sure that humans are aware of what's going on. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it's really critical that we recognize that the marginal cost of content creation is plummeting. In fact, it's going to zero. But the cost of trusted information is skyrocketing and will continue to skyrocket. This brings us back to that misalignment of incentives. We have to know that the ability to create all sorts of content, music, audio, video, images, text, code, is going to plummet. The cost of doing that will go to near zero. So we need to find some way where trusted information is not only valued, but there's an incentive to create trusted information as opposed to false information or misleading information. So very critically important there. So let's end on a high note here, because I know that's a kind of a dark area to go, and we're just about out of time. So let me race forward just a little bit and save a few minutes for questions. Just an open question, not a poll question, but think about what the impact will be on training and learning for you in your practice. Think about, some of these examples that we looked at. What are some of the immediate opportunities today? I would think, and I've sort of narrowed this list down, here are some very practical, safe areas, both from a tool perspective and a topic perspective, that you could begin to experiment with the use of conversational AI in learning. And very broadly, I'll tell you, here is my dream with this. And it's one of the reasons I got into this space. It's one of the driving factors for us at Noodle Factory is I believe that done well, the positive impact of conversational AI is going to allow us to change the economics, what are called the unit economics of learning, where the cost to deliver learning to more learners is going to go down. And the time that it takes to deliver that learning is going to shrink. So lower cost per capita, training and learning, better learning outcomes, lower time to outcome. So that's kind of the dream that I've got. We're certainly not there yet, but that's kind of the direction that I'm going, is to try to get into a position where, that's what we're able to make happen. So last thing that I'll share with you, and then I'm glad to stay on a few minutes more, Wing, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Here's some things that you might want to capture and take as reading. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but in particular, I'll draw your attention to this blog post that was written by the CEO of OpenAI a number of years ago, but it's sort of his manifesto, his vision for the use of AI. And that might have evolved a little bit, but it's a very interesting read. And then these other works are kind of give you a balanced view of what's going on in the world of conversational AI and AI more broadly. If you're curious, just because you've attended today, if you'd like to try some of these things out for yourself for free, you can scan that QR code. Wing, I can provide you with this information too. You could go and just try this out for yourself. You could certainly do this on GPT, ChatGPT or Bard or Bing. So pick the tool of your choice, but here would be my encouragement to you is find something and experiment and see where you can potentially bring this into your own practice. And with that, we're at the end of our planned session. I know we're right at time, but if there are any other questions, I'm glad to take those at this point.
Yep. So we actually have a lot of questions,
Okay.
mainly to do with the risk and I guess the future opportunities. So to start off, one question was, what are your proposed areas or topics of AI that we should attempt to enlighten ourselves in to be sufficiently be in the loop?
So I think if there's one takeaway in that area is get comfortable with this idea of what's called prompt engineering, meaning the wording that you use to prompt the AIs to do certain things. So there's a real skill to that. In fact, if you want to train your teams eventually on something related to this, the ability to come up with good prompts that get the right outcomes from these generative and conversational AI tools, that's a real skill that everyone's going to need.
All right. And what are your thoughts about AGI? Any possibility, and if so, how soon? And should we be concerned?
So AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence. We are not there yet. AGI, the dream, and by the way, Sam Altman, who's one of the co-founders and the CEO of OpenAI, this is his dream, is artificial general intelligence. That's where you essentially replicate human intelligence in software. We're not there yet, but it's hard to say when we will get there. It could be 5 years, it could be 50 years. It's probably further out than we think. But yeah, we should be concerned, because if we can't get things right now, ChatGPT compared to AGI is a toy. So if we can't get it right now, we're going to have real problems with AGI. So this is where in my view, I think governments need to step in, policymakers need to step in and very thoughtfully come up with the right frameworks.
Yep. And what are your thoughts on clustered efforts to democratize AI? What are the implications on ethics, governance, and control AI development, possessing the ability to control the pace of AI development?
Well, pick your analogy. The toothpaste is out of the tube, the genie's out of the bottle. We're almost a little late for that because AI is being democratized, and this is where policymakers tend to have a problem. By the time they catch up from a policy perspective, the industry is already a mile down the track. So this is another thing where we need to figure it out, the balance. It's a good thing that AI is being democratized in terms of access, but because that democratization of access means bad actors also get to play in the sandbox, somehow we need to figure out the balance there.
All right, and this is actually quite an interesting question, but it's a little bit political. So it's asking, what are the ethical implications of allowing local or short-term social or political influences to affect the responses of GPT? And is there any way to select around them?
I'm not sure I quite understand the context of the question. I think it's about manipulation of responses. But this is where the companies do have a responsibility to be aware of what's going on and put safeguards in place where people who might be trying to game the responses for their own political purposes or maybe social disruptive purposes. The companies involved need to have that sort of response in place, similar to what a lot of people have clamored for in social media. We're going to have that problem even more so with conversational AI because the difficulty in telling what's true or accurate and not is going to become that much more difficult.
Yeah. Okay, and we have a question on ethics. What is the status of ethics development on the effects on humanity in AI applications?
So this is where I think if you're interested in this topic, if you go and you probably would want to go to Google Scholar for this and start there. There's a lot of rich research in the area of, here's the search term, AI safety. This is a growing body of research, and there's a lot of interesting, thought-provoking pieces. Researchers in AI safety are now being called upon by policymakers for advice. So that would be a great starting point. If you want to use those, let me just go back to the books that I recommended. So one of the books that I recommended, The Alignment Problem, touches on this in great detail. So great book if you're interested in that particular topic.
Okay, and we have another question on, do you think it's insincere to use AI-assisted tools to craft a personalized message to someone, such as an email or text? Or is it the future and we have to embrace it?
I think, yeah, that's a tricky question because in a way, you could think about some of the use of AI, like spell checking or grammar checking. If you're trying to strengthen or clarify something that you have created and you've said, I think that's a very different use case from, getting ChatGPT to write your thank you notes or, because you just don't want to do it. So yeah, I think that answer is going to be different for everyone. But I personally have used ChatGPT to do things like grammar check and clarity check beyond tools like Grammarly. You could even say Grammarly does this today. But yeah, tricky one. I don't have a good answer for that one.
All right, so I think we'll just take 2 more questions before we end off.
Okay.
So will incorporating AI in education be able to lower university costs for students? And in your opinion, will universities be open to lowering their fees?
Oh, wow. That's an entire topic on its own, isn't it? I do
Yeah.
think, to take the first part, I think the first part is easier. So just like we've seen, and this was accelerated because of COVID, but you're seeing an opening up and a rethink of higher education. So I do think that that trend will continue. And so things like micro-credentials will become more important, and maybe AI becomes a key part of micro-credentialing. Regarding the fees and the economics of higher education, I think that we don't have the time to unpack that one. That's a very complicated issue.
All right, and the last question is, what are the tools and resources that can help deal with detecting, give me a moment, generative AI used for deception purposes?
Yeah, so here I would probably direct you to, and Wing, I'll see if I can find some links that you could share with everyone later.
Sure.
But OpenAI, to their credit, has put a number of different tools out there for detection of what's been created by AIs. There are also open source tools that are out there, but this is kind of a fast moving space. I would probably look to the big technology companies. I know this may sound counterintuitive. At this point, look to the big technology companies for what they're releasing. So OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Alibaba, the big players in this space, they're releasing information on how to do this and even tools to do this. That's a good starting point.
All right, and with that, we have come to the end of the talk. Thank you, Jim, again for sharing. I really
pleasure.
appreciate how you actually break them down, the technical parts to something that is digestible for us to understand. And thanks for sharing your insights with us. So everyone, before we end, let me just share some of the upcoming events. And if we can, maybe get your help to help us fill up the post-event survey, which will help us to, improve and curate better topics that you all will want to, attend. Not to worry if you miss certain parts of the session. The recording and the slides will also be sent to you after this session, okay? And next, here is the contact details of Jim. So Jim actually shared his details just now as well, but if you want to find out more information about AI, or you want to just ask him some questions, feel free to connect with him. Then our upcoming innovBite session will be on how we simplify robotics for factories. All right, so it will be happening on April 20th, so check that out. Then if you are also keen in AI based on today's response, I guess a lot of us are still very much into AI. So we actually have an upcoming InnoVlog session on 21st April. So you would be interested to, attend this. Yeah. So that's all from me. And without further ado, I'll just hand it back to Afida.
Okay, thank you, Wing and Jim, for the presentation. We're running on extended time, so I'm not going to take your time further, but just let me flash a few slides. The first one will be on the books that we think is good on the topic, and these are available at NLB's Overdrive. There are QR codes and links to each book. So not to worry, we'll be sending you the slides after the talk. Next will be some 2 courses on ChatGPT that are on NLB's Udemy website. So with your login, your username, sorry, you can enroll into these programs for free, right? Next, we are not going to have any tech talk for LL Library participants. Next week, we are shifting to financial planning, and we're going to have an activity-based workshop at LL Library at Paya Lebar. So if you're interested, you can sign up at the QR code or the website. Last but not least, if you have any comments on the program, you can use this QR code or link to submit your comments. All the links I've pasted in the chat, so you can actually copy them from there. So I think we are safe to go now, Wing. Thank you, Jim, for your talk, and everyone for participating. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you at the next session. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.